So I should also maybe give you just a couple of points on my background. I actually, like Scott, started in the natural sciences, and at some point worked for government as a risk assessor. So I've done that for a few years, and then I decided to quit my job and study philosophy, which turned out to be very profitable actually. And after that, it worked on governance and science policy and other issues. So I would like to introduce to you a concept, actually an activity that exists, responsible innovation. And I want to relate it to risk governance. So I know this is the solution section. I wouldn't say that responsible innovation is the solution, but I think it provides a toolkit and a different perspective that can be helpful in this context. So to do that, I have to do a brief history of risk governance. And I actually want to start with, although this book is not that old, but with the idea that the story of risk goes back a long time. And I say that because I believe, and I actually have experienced, that people are natural risk assessors. It's not hard for people to take this concept, for example, of exposure and hazard, and make their own language and the proliferation of concepts. Everyone seems to be an expert in a sense, just like with urban planning, where everyone knows what should be done. It goes also back to Promethean myth, that if you have foresight, which we don't have perfectly, unfortunately, what Prometheus had, then you can defeat the gods. So it is also a very powerful tool to have a good handle on risk. It is very significant. I think the risk assessment story in modern times really started with Silent Spring, DDT, 1962, and the US EPA, which was founded in 1970, actually credits Rachel Carson in part with its creation. And that is when formal risk assessment, I think, became more complex, more complete. There were other US agencies created at the same time on occupational safety and so on. And it coincided with the first Earth Day in 1970. So this is, I think, an important point. More directly on risk, there is the Society for Risk Analysis. Well, I'll just do it from memory. SRA was founded in 1982. And I don't exactly know their prehistory, but it's one of the few organizations in that space where the social sciences and the natural sciences really come together. So that's quite noteworthy. This book by the National Academies of Science and the National Research Council, NRC, this from 1984, it's commonly known as the Red Book, and we'll talk about it briefly afterwards, made a huge impact internationally on the concept on how risk actually should be dealt with in an administration. And then Ulrich Beck's book, Risikogesellschaft, was issued in 1962 and English translation 1992. So the Red Book, I think we have to visit here just one slide, because this concept that was really made very public in this panel report continues to this day and is debated to this day. But what they said, or at least the interpretation of what they said, was that risk assessment and risk management are quite distinct activities. And this is more on the is side, like to refer back to Scott, this is more on the ought side. And they can lead in the extreme case to the desire to actually sequester the experts. Because one way, the reason this report was written had to do with political meddling in science. And one cure to do, a natural thing to do is to keep the things apart. If there's no exposure to politics, then apparently there should be no pollution, so to speak. Which people changed their mind later, but this was the state. 1990, I want to bring this up because just to make sure, to make it really clear that governance is actually quite a new concept in sort of public speech. Of course, it's an old concept in terms of its practice. But this logo of a think tank, the Institute on Governance, was one of the first think tanks in the world, which I can name with the word governance. And I believe it's fair to say that the Rio Summit 1992 was the first huge international gathering where the NGOs suddenly had power, or suddenly were present. Coincides directly with the arrival of email. So email took off early 90s. The first World Wide Web page was done, I think, 1992. So don't forget that. And in 1996, this book was issued, same outfit, National Research Council, different committee, of course, and it came with a very different chart. So what you see here 10 years later, 12 years later, is lots of arrows. Let's put it this way. And so you see the word deliberation here, you see feedback, you see deliberation here. So the idea is that this whole dream, and this follows actually Scott's point, you know, the dream of making science pure by trying to squeeze out or ignore the values is not the best way to control bias. If you want to control bias, it's actually better to make the values explicit and deal with them. 2000, just very quickly to see it continues, the concepts actually do not change so much. The International Risk Governance Council was created in 2003 in Geneva. They came up with new language, but very similar, they put communication right in the center, visually, that's the same idea. And now ISO, who is semi-commercial operation, they realized there could be the market for risk standards, created a series of risk standards. And again, and you see the arrows are both ways here too. That's very significant because people who work on this try to dissociate themselves from the idea of strategic communication. This is much more deliberation or almost partnership, therefore both ways, and not education or strategic communication. I think that's the reason for these arrows. Now, before I get to responsible innovation, I just want to emphasize something. Risk is really a very negative concept. Actually, industry would prefer if regulators would use the word safety often. But risk has to do with regulation, has to do with the stop pedal. So I put here as a symbol an Earth ship. It's innovative, but it's not high-tech in the same sense as this. This is a model of a sea steadying an island, more than 200 miles off the shore, and therefore in regulation, ethics-free place. And this is actually being planned. And the idea is that once you have a city like this, you can build a new society, a libertarian society. So this is the gas pedal on steroids. When you look at these two terms, and here first time responsible innovation comes, they are really oxymorons in the sense that they're trying to bridge these two divides. Sustainable development has the green component here, and the development component obviously on the other side. And this balance was important for its launch. And the people who launch responsible innovation, I believe, I won't be sure, but I believe they want to use the attraction of innovation. And there's not a single nation in the world who is not pro-innovation of some sort. You use the attraction, but you also put in a constraint so that you actually go into the best possible direction. The question is how? So let me talk just a little bit about responsible innovation. There are several definitions. There's even a very important outfit who refuses to define the concept, which is kind of interesting and maybe not so rare. This is the one I like, partially because it's very short. It's by Jack Stilgo and colleagues. Jack Stilgo got pulled into responsible innovation because of geoengineering. There was a proposal in England to do a rather benign experiment to create a vapor cloud, but it was labeled geoengineering. And it became a huge issue, and it kind of brought in this whole idea of, is it responsible? Because the consequence, the long-term consequence of which. Responsible innovation means taking care of the future through collective stewardship of science innovation in the past. So it's actually not so totally different from sustainable development in some ways. But you have this word innovation, and you have the governance type right. 4 key principles. I think these are generally accepted, and they're from the same source, just so you get a bit of a sense what they actually mean. Anticipation, you can't go wrong with paying attention to the future, to plan well. It contains issues such as foresight, tech foresight, assessment, and very important upstream engagement. That means that within this innovation system, to go upstream means basically to go up to the labs or to the site of engineering. And if you do that, then for starters you will know better what's coming. You have a much better sense of the so-called pipeline. But you also have a chance to influence, in a sense, or at least dialogue with the inventors. So the values can be shared upstream. So if you take this idea of arrow going both ways, then 5 minutes. then the upstream engagement is not only collecting the information from the labs to plan better, but also provide into the labs a sense of what the society wants. This idea of bringing external values in comes here and here again. The concept of reflexivity is a placeholder for debate, training, even codes or moratoria to sort of slow down innovation. Sounds like how the economy is kind of managed through the interest rate. You know? So you put something into place to give pause, to give chance for import of external values, but also reflection. Inclusion, so that's the thing we have been talking about, but very specifically user-centered designs, user values, so the whole design for environment, design for society. Responsiveness is the code for adaptive management and nimble reaction, which also came up before in this workshop. Now the reason and by the way, I forgot to say, Heather Douglas can't be here. She couldn't travel because she had a back problem. But we did this together, so she's on board with this talk, and the ideas also in part hers, so this is a shared talk. We are both involved in this group called the Virtual Institute for Responsible Innovation. So Heather and I are the two Canadian reps. But this is just one activity, and it's maybe not the largest. This comes out of the US, Arizona State University. The largest outfit is actually out of the European Funding Council. So Horizon 2020 is going on for several years. It's a huge amount of money. Canadian researchers are interested and involved, and they have responsible research and regulation as one of the topics that research should consider. I asked Jack, is this already like a regulatory system? Is this something like a research ethics board where scientists actually have to comply? And he says, no, it's not the case, thanks. And it's not sure where it's headed. But in the meantime, the European Union has created a very large toolkit with questionnaires on how to get engineers and scientists to think about society, ethics, and issues such as the need to be transparent and deliver. So this is sort of a little pitch to get you interested in this concept. For Canada, not much has happened. Heather and I put together a website. Natalie has agreed to participate. It's very new, and we just started a series of little chats to basically say, what should we do in Canada to use this concept, which is coming, which is already here in Europe anyway, so that we get the best result. I think there's some interest to not make it into a red tape tool, hopefully an enabler. It could be also simply an umbrella or gap filler for the whole portfolio of issues around science and engineering. So this is just an invitation to actually maybe take an interest in this and help shape it. And with this, thank you.